And here we are, podcast episode number 6 of the See Through podcast. And it's truly a special one, as I had the chance to chat and catch up with Kate Connor, who is a friend and former coworker of mine. Kate is a writer, creative strategist, creative director, and mother. And while we cover all of those things, we mainly centered our conversation on Kate's daughter, Madeline, who was born blind due to optic nerve hypoplasia. Optic nerve hypoplasia is a congenital condition in which the optic nerve is underdeveloped. The optic nerve is responsible for transmitting visual signals from the retina to the brain. Kate's perspective on raising Madeline, who is now 12, is very unique, as Madeline was also diagnosed with leukemia at the age of 8. Good news though, Madeline's cancer is now in remission and she's doing great. Anyways, this conversation covers a lot of topics when it comes to parenting a child with a disability, and I'm super excited to share it with you. But can I tell you what I'm also excited about? I'm excited that I also had the opportunity to talk with Madeline, Kate's daughter, herself. Talking to Madeline was so much fun, and that episode will go live next week. So I guess that makes this a 2-parter, so check back in for that episode. Anyways, let's get into it. Here's part 1 of my conversation with Kate and Madeline. Hey Kate, how's it going?
Hey Lance, I'm good. How are you?
It's been a long time.
Has been a long time. What, couple years at least?
Yeah, let's think about that. I saw you, we worked together in Raleigh, North Carolina, at an advertising agency. I've been in New York for 2 years. I was at my last job before that a year.
Oh,
so
wow.
It's at least over 3 years.
That's longer than I thought. Wow, time flies, huh?
Yeah.
Well, how are you? How's New York?
I'm good. New York's cool.
Good.
So for the listeners out there, Kate was a creative director at an advertising agency I used to work at in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I was a video producer / editor. And me and Kate worked together a lot in a lot of different projects. And she's also a really talented writer. You wrote a book, and I was doing some research, and we never talked about your book. We never talked about your blog. It was almost like you didn't, I kind of think that's cool because it's pretty successful. And I just was wondering, like, what's up with your book right now? Can you tell everyone about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I feel like it was a different lifetime. So I wrote a book called Enough. I used to work with like high school, middle school, and college age women, young women. And so I wrote a book called Enough, and it was just 10 things I think we should be telling young women. And when I wrote it, I had a very different like worldview and philosophy than I do now. And so an interesting thing about publishing is that it's permanent, right? Like my name is on that book forever, no matter how much my thoughts or opinions change. And so I'm incredibly proud of it. I had a blog that went crazy viral back in like the early days of things going viral, right? Like it was sort of pre everybody's 15 minutes of TikTok fame. And it crashed all of my websites. It crashed my computer. I got phone calls from radio stations all over the country, and it did really well. And some of those phone calls were from publishers. And so I ended up publishing a couple books on what I think we should tell young women and everything I learned working with high school students. And it was great. It was really successful. I still believe a lot of the things I wrote, I would just frame them up differently. And yeah, so when I came back to work, like not as self-employed and not just as an author, I came back to like agency life and marketing world. I didn't talk about it a lot, but I think it was one of the things that got me in the door, right? After being self-employed for a very long time, and basically being a stay-at-home mom with a writing gig for a very long time. I think the fact that I had published a book
definitely helps. Yeah.
Was like, that was part of my resume that got me back in the door to creative work professionally.
Awesome. So are you, you took a pause on your writing career currently?
I did. And mostly that was circumstantial. I love it. And I still, I find that when I have the time to decompress, right? When my kids are having an easy breezy week or they're with their grandparents and work seems easy and I have a couple of days to rest and putter around the house, the thing that always bubbles back up for me is writing.
Mm-hmm.
But it takes that level of work and attention, and just my life circumstances right now, I don't have that to give it. So I suspect that it will always be a thing I love, always be a thing I do, potentially a thing that publishing being a thing I do more of in the future. But for now, I'm raising kids and working in creative marketing.
Yeah, and you get your writing fix, I'm sure, at work.
I do. Yeah, it's a different topic, obviously. So I work for a tech company.
Nice.
So I write a lot about like software and APIs and telecom stuff, but it's the same skills, right? It's the
Mm-hmm.
same problem solving. It's the same wrestling with words, and that part is fun to me.
Yeah, a few more technical terms thrown in there.
Yeah, yeah, a lot more
I
technical
worked
terms.
at a software company called Red Hat, which you're familiar with,
Yep.
but it's an open source software company. And some of the video content I had to like wrap my head around making took a lot of research, and and to be honest with you, I don't think I ever quite
Yeah.
fully grasped it.
Isn't that funny that you don't have to fully understand what you're talking about
Yeah,
to make
exactly.
good marketing? I feel like we should all be afraid of that maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
No, I go back and I read the things, the first pieces that I made, the first pages that I wrote, the first products that I promoted when I got to my job at Bandwidth, which is where I am now. And I'm like, oh, I can tell that lady had no idea what she was talking
Yeah.
about. Like I can't believe they let that go. So it comes, but it's definitely a learning curve.
So you talked about how your life circumstances are a little different these days from when you were a author. So you are a mother of 3. I'm sure that's that's a lot to like handle.
It is. It's a delightful chaos.
Yeah. And that kind of brings up, the reason me and you are chatting, because you don't have a disability yourself, but your daughter, Madeline, does. And your firstborn, Madeline, was born blind. Am I right?
Yep. We found out when she was 4 months old. So my whole pregnancy and the first 4 months of her life, we did not know that she could not see. And we found out when she was 4 months old.
4 months old.
Yep.
What is her disability called?
Yeah, her diagnosis is optic nerve hypoplasia, which basically means that her optic nerve just never developed in utero. So
Okay.
her eyes are healthy. Her brain is healthy. They both work fine, but the nerve that connects them it didn't develop fully, and so it can't pass any information from her eye to her brain. So when we're talking to like lay people, we say it's like a water hose, right? Like the
Yeah.
smaller the hose, the less water can get through. And most people have, I think it's close to 1 million axons, and Madeline has maybe a tenth of that. And so it's a pretty significant impairment.
Okay. So you said there's still some communication though between the brain and the eye.
Yeah, it's
So that means Madeline can see a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny. So here's the thing I learned that I did not know about vision loss that I learned very quickly. There's no great test for this.
Okay.
The only way to know what a person can see is to ask them,
True.
right? So when you're working with an infant,
Mm-hmm.
there's no scan, there's no test we can run to know what she can see. And so I have learned a lot about what Madeline's vision is like only as she's aged and been able to tell me with a broader vocabulary what she can see. So she has some vision. Um, she can see color. She can see things that are very close range and high contrast. So she can read in large print at school, but it has to be really bold and a big font on white paper. And she holds it really close to her face. She like puts her eye right down on the paper. So if it's when she's doing like arts and crafts or drawing, her whole face gets covered in like markers and paint because she's got her face smashed right up against it to try and use her functional vision.
Yeah, I remember you brought Madeline into the office a few times, and I think I saw her look at a tablet
Mm-hmm.
in that fashion you're describing.
Yeah. Yeah. So posture's tough with a lot of VI kids, so visually impaired kids, because as babies, so it's different if you lose your sight later in life because you've built all of these habits, right? And all of your way of operating in the world.
Mm-hmm.
As a baby, you never learn to hold your head up because why would you hold your head up? Like that's those muscles in your neck
Mm.
and in your back. If you're not looking at anything, you have no need to pick up your head ever. So as a little one, I remember constantly telling Madeline, chin up,
Yeah.
chin up, to try and strengthen the muscles in the back of her neck. And yeah, she leans down to inspect things and to look at things and to feel things. And so, yeah, posture is just one of the things that I did. Again, I learned a lot as she grew up. Um, there's a lot of things that are connected to vision that I never would have guessed as a sighted person that I've learned raising a daughter that's blind.
You've learned as you went, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
How did you find out? So you didn't know during your pregnancy. You find out
Yep.
After you said around 4 months old.
Yep.
What was your initial reaction to finding that out?
Oh man, yeah. Oof. So a couple things. All babies, all newborns, their eyes sort of roll and roam. They don't have great vision anyway. It develops as they get older.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why we didn't know at first, because the way Madeline's eyes work are the way a newborn's eyes. I mean, it
Yeah.
was the same when she was little. And as she got older, her eyes roam. It's called a nystagmus. They like sort of roll.
Mm-hmm.
And hers is called a roaming or rolling nystagmus, where they're just like big eye movements from one side of her eye to the other. And she's basically scanning for anything that she can see. And it was like she was never able to fixate on something. So when you have a baby, you have these milestones, and one of them is tracking. Like you can see something, and when I move it, you follow it with your eyes,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like if I like the videos you see of cats and dogs like shaking their heads when they're following through.
Exactly. Yeah.
Madeline never did that. So she smiled, she met all of her developmental milestones, but it was like she never could track. So eventually we went to see an ophthalmologist, and I don't know what I was expecting. But the first thing he told me, he walked into the room, and I will remember it for the rest of my life. He said, "Mrs. Connor, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know how well she can see at all. And I'm referring you to Emory, to, this pediatric ophthalmologist. We were living outside of Atlanta at the time. Um, and sure enough, we went, and it was business as usual for him. It was like, no, he was like, oh yeah, optic nerve hypoplasia. This is like one of the second or first leading causes of congenital blindness in kids. And so here's a bunch of resources.
Yeah.
And he treated it like he saw it every day. As a parent, it took a minute for that to register. Like the whole way home in my head, I just kept saying, she's blind.
Yeah.
She's blind. Like she's 4 months old and she's blind. And so as a parent, it's really easy to catastrophize, right? So when I first found out, I was not thinking about what it would be like to raise a blind infant. I was like, oh my gosh, she's never going to drive. Like, oh my gosh, like, is she going to make friends in high school? Like, I jumped straight ahead to like way, way, way down the road. Because I didn't know what to do with the near term.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been in similar situations, not to that quite that extent, but my mom it's a eye disease called retinitis pigmentosa, which affects like your peripheral vision and your ability to see in like the dark.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I was about maybe 13 or whatever that it started showing up in my eye exams. And then I went to like an eye specialist in Chapel Hill, and they kind of confirmed that I had inherited RP from my mom.
Wow.
And as a 13-year-old, I was like, well, it wasn't affecting me yet because like my vision was not affected at that point. But I knew I had it, and my brain couldn't really process it at that age. But I could tell like my mom was like upset by it because she kind of knows what's coming up ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. That part was painful as a parent. Have you heard I'm not going to do it justice because I'm not reading it directly, but have you heard the metaphor, the analogy about a child with a disability about going to Holland, a trip to Holland? Have you heard this?
I've never heard that.
Okay.
Let's hear it.
So it is the best. I heard this shortly after Madeline was diagnosed, and I just wept because I felt seen. And I've shared it with so many people because, and I mean like sighted people, typically developing people, because it is the best description of how it felt as a parent to find out, to get a diagnosis that is like life changing.
Hmm.
That I one of the doctors that we work with calls it the great before, right? Like
Okay.
you're living in the great before, and then you find out this information, and nothing is the same after. Right? Um, so there's this metaphor about going to Holland, and it says when you're when you're having a baby, it's like you're preparing for a trip, right? You do your research, you read your books, and you decide I'm gonna go to Paris. Like I'm planning my Parisian vacation. So I learn French, and I learn all of the buildings that I want to see and the art that I want to see, and I learn about the people that I will meet there and the culture that I will experience and the foods that I will eat and the way that I will get around the city, the transportation that I will use, and I get my guidebooks and I plan. Um, and then the day comes and I'm excited, and I get on the plane, and I hear, we travel across the ocean 9 hours, and the plane touches down and the flight attendant says, "Welcome to Holland."
Okay.
And you're like, "What?" And you have this moment where you're like, "No, no, 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 no. I was going to Paris. I don't." And you have this series of grief. All of the things I thought I knew are no longer true. All the things I thought I knew about parenting are no longer true. The milestones that I thought we would hit, we're probably not going to hit those milestones.
Hmm.
The friends we thought we would have, probably going to have different friends. The way that we navigate school is not what I thought. Um, Tag and playgrounds are not going to be what I thought.
Hmm.
Um, and so you have this series of like everything I thought was going to be true about parenting is no longer true. And I am back at square one. And that is what it felt like to be given a diagnosis like 4 months in. Hey, your child is blind. There is no known cure. There's no known cause. It's just a because of medicine. There is no treatment. She can maybe use magnification, but she'll be a braille reader. And you're now raising a blind child in a world made for sighted people. But as you go, you start to realize, oh, well, Holland also has transportation and it also has art and it also has people and friends and things to do. It's just different. And so that learning curve I experienced, and in many ways am still experiencing as a
Hmm.
parent, right? Like it is not what I thought it would be. It is different, but it is still good. And that was like the best way I can think to describe, which I did not write. Someone else brilliant, way more experienced than me, put that into words. And it is the thing that I think captures the learning curve and what it feels like to be given a big, big diagnosis for your baby.
I love that. I've never heard that. You'll have to send me that too, so I can.
Yeah. Now you can pass it along. Yeah.
So yeah, you still think that you're figuring it out, right? I'm sure it's going to be an everyday thing.
Yep.
So what? How old is Madeline currently?
She's 12. She's about to be 13.
12, about to be 13.
Mm-hmm.
So what have you had to do differently,
Hmm.
and how have you kind of helped Madeline like thrive
Hmm.
with the vision she does have?
Yeah. So there's two categories of this, right? There's like physical things. There's like the tactile things that you do to like help her navigate her world, right?
Hmm.
Um, those are not intuitive to me as a sighted person, but relatively easy to learn and relatively easy to do. So those things looked like, telling her to keep her chin up, and we organized our home in a way, and I kept my house really clean so that she so that she wouldn't, when she leaves her toys all over the place, like she would trip over them. Um, one of the things I still use today that I learned right after we found out that she was blind is physical cues.
Okay.
So when Madeline was a baby, she did not sleep. And I was like, oh, that's fine. Babies don't sleep. And when we found out she was blind, I was like, she has no idea if it's day or night. Like, she doesn't know why sometimes we put her in the crib and she cries and we come get her and take her out to play. And other times we put her in the crib and we just expect her to stay there all night. Like, she can't see it getting dark outside. She can't see me changing into my pajamas. She can't see, like, all of those like visual cues that kids get that signal the rhythm of your day. Madeline wasn't getting those. So we just very intentionally built in non-visual cues. And so we had a blanket that we only used at bedtime. It was not
Okay.
for naps. It was not for comfort. It was not for snuggling. It was not for picnics. It was like bedtime only. And so when she felt it over time, that became like a landmark in her day. Um, I did a lot of narrating. I'm chatty anyway. But one of the things Madeline's vision teacher told us to do was to describe everything. Um, so when grandma comes to visit, you say, Grandma is coming in the door behind you. She's wearing shorts because it's hot outside and she has her
Gotcha.
hair done. I mean, like, just everything was just like running commentary for Madeline. Um, One of the things that's really helpful for people that are visually impaired is just introductions. It's really
Mhm.
easy if you have a close relationship with someone to assume they can know you by your voice. Um, that puts a lot of pressure on the visually impaired person. So
True.
sometimes, like, grandparents and aunts and uncles and teachers will walk in and be like, "Hey," and expect a reaction.
Yeah,
And
it's
this
like, "Who are
poor
you?"
visually impaired child is like, "I want to make you happy. I don't want to hurt your feelings, but like,
Yeah.
I have no idea who you are." So we had to educate the people in our lives. Like, even if you see Madeline every week at school or at church, like, you should just introduce yourself. Hey, it's grandma. Hey, it's Uncle Michael. And so introductions is a big. So anyway, there's I cannot even express you how many the long list of the things we do for Madeline and educate the people in our lives to do for Madeline in a like physical, tactile way. Um, the other part is there's an emotional coping, right? With like what it is to be different and to have a disability. Um, that did not show up when she was little because she didn't know any different. Like, she'd been born blind, and so she was just like happy. Like, she didn't know what it was to be sighted. Um, and then as she got a little bit older, she realized she was different, but like didn't matter because kids just played and she just like, she just used in large print. And when you're reading books that are like C Spot Run, it's pretty easy to read in large print. Um, as she gets older, the social part gets really hard. Um, and so what the things that we are doing for Madeline now are adaptations for school. How do you type on a computer when you can't see the cursor? How do you get used to a screen reader? Um, and then how do you navigate friendships when you can't see social cues? You don't see girls roll their eyes, right? Or like shift their
Yeah.
weight or get bored, or um, when you can't pick up on non-visual communication, how do you connect with people? That's like a whole other thing we're working through right now.
Mhm. So is Madeline in a public school?
Yep, she is.
Awesome. Has she have had to take any classes, like more formal kind of teachings about how to use certain technologies and things like that?
Yeah, they started, so it starts really early. We started her with Braille like in kindergarten. And the thing about Braille is like there's a physical component, right? You even if you just memorize all the dots and all the code, like you still wouldn't be able to read it. You have to train your fingers to like be able to read Braille, which is a lot of like nerve sensitivity. And so when she was in preschool, she had vision support coming into her classroom, her VI teachers that,
Okay.
and they would be like, there's two braille lines. One is really long and one is really short. Tell me which one is longer. Tell me which circle is bigger. Tell me what shape is on the page. See if you can count how many lines are on the page. And it was just training her hands to notice braille dots. So we started like a non-visual education like before she even went to school.
Okay.
And now that has obviously evolved into like some technology support. She also does O&M, which is orientation and mobility. So it's like how to use a white cane, how to spot traffic patterns and go upstairs and find curbs and walk in the woods and all of those things that come naturally to sighted people. Mental mapping, how to get around the school building, all that stuff.
The mobility aspect, would you say Madeline's pretty good at navigating around? Like,
Oh, she's phenomenal. I have to fight with her to use her cane. I have to remind her that she needs it. She is fearless and incredibly independent. And once she familiarizes herself with a space, um, she's golden. Very often, because Madeline uses the little functional vision she has very well, and because she is so mobile, a lot of people when they first meet Madeline don't know that she's blind. They're like, something's happening with her eyes. Like it's not quite right.
yeah.
Like, is it a lazy eye? Like we don't know. But yeah, very often people don't know that she's blind because she moves so well throughout the world.
Yeah, that's interesting. Sometimes I see people walking around the city and they're like completely blind. They have the cane and they're taking the subway and they're going down like multiple flights of steps and they're crossing busy like intersections. And I'm always just like, to be honest with you, like pumps me up.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, that's awesome. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, and my vision is I have a lot of central vision intact. My peripheral vision's mainly, I guess, affected.
Mm-hmm.
It's degenerative, so it gets worse over time.
Yeah.
So, like for example, I told you I learned I had RP when I was 13.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really start noticing differences until I was like 22,
Mm.
and that was a slight change. And then by the time I was actually working with you, that's when I was like starting to question.
Yeah.
It's like how like long should I drive for? You
Yeah.
know? And it's interesting because I talked about how I didn't know you were, and well, I knew you were an author, but we never talked about it. But like, I never talked about like me having like something like
No.
different with my eyes.
I had no idea until I think long after we were working together. I think that was
Yeah.
when you were moving to New York that I was like, "What?"
Yeah. So, and you know, it's a bunch of things that add up. You know, I was working in video production. I didn't want, I didn't
Yeah.
want, it's kind of ironic and
It's
funny if
very
you think about it.
visual. Yeah.
It's like, I don't want to be like, hey, just so you know, like I'm losing my vision, but don't worry about it. You know, and it was starting to get hard on certain sets with a
Yeah.
bunch of light stands and
Yeah.
microphones. And I was just like, I felt like I was getting slower.
I've run into stuff again as a sighted person and like
Yeah.
trip on wires and knock things over and yeah.
So I basically was like, I gotta just switch over to video editing, which is what I do now, which
Yeah.
to me, I think was my strongest thing anyways. But yeah, back to the mobility aspect. I see people in New York all the time walking around with white canes.
Mm-hmm.
And looking ahead to my future, it's hard to predict because there's not much you can predict. I may have to use one of those too. So I'm very interested in things like that. That's why I asked you. I'm like,
It's remarkable, and that's our goal. So we, every year we sit down with all of Madeline's teachers and we have an IEP, which is just like an individualized education plan. So any child with any kind of special need has an IEP in place for behavioral needs, any kind of special need. Um, and we always start talking about the parents' goals for Madeline. And from the very beginning, our goal has been well, one, that she's happy, but two, that she is as independent as possible. And it's not because we want to force that on her. Obviously, we'll help forever, and I believe that nobody can get through life without a community. But if she's ever unable to do anything, may it not be because we didn't teach her, right? May it
true.
not be because we didn't give her the tools or the opportunity. Um, and so much of all of the planning and all of the school and all of the work that we have put in for Madeline has been around exactly what you're saying, right? That like you're walking down the street and you see a person that's visually impaired living their lives and they go to work and they come home and they fix their own dinner and they pick out their clothes.
Yeah.
And they have to do that differently than sighted people, but they still can do it. And yeah, so we do We do huge work. Her teachers and her specialists, her physical therapists and occupational therapists, we do big work every year, inching toward independence for her.
Does she? I know these are really formative years,
Mm.
the 12 to, let's just say, through high school.
Yeah.
You said that she's starting to kind of notice little differences now.
Yep.
What's the process like keeping her spirits high?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've sort of had a, I don't want to like introduce a whole nother variable. We've had a master class in like how to endure and survive hard things. Madeline was also diagnosed with cancer several years ago. She's fine. She's in remission. But in many ways, that experience taught us how to, it taught me how to talk my kids through something that is unfair and wrong. Nobody wants the toxic positivity of like, well, at least you've got this kind of super curable cancer. And you're like, yeah, well, it still sucks for 3 years. Like, or at least people said, oh, so well intended, saying things like, I don't, all the cliche phrases like, oh, well, you're going to have so many other gifts and like, you're going to be able to help so many other people. But to someone who's going through something that's really difficult and really unfair, it doesn't matter. That's not a trade I want to make. I don't want my daughter to be blind so she can help a bunch of other people. That's not fair. Right? Like I don't want my kid to have cancer so she can be someone else's like inspiration porn, right? Like
Exactly.
I and so the we have had quite a few experiences that have prepared me as a parent for this moment, right? Raising a teenager who is figuring out that her life is different and it's harder than other people's, and that's not fair. And honestly, it might sound counterintuitive, but the number one thing we do is just agree. Yeah, you're right. That's really unfair. It is, your life is harder. It is. Um, you are dealing with grown-up stuff that most adults will never have to experience. And it's unfair that you had to do that at such a young age. And it's unfair that you have to compensate for a world built for sighted people.
Yeah, I was going to get into that. So Madeline was diagnosed, it was leukemia, right?
Yep. Yep.
At what age?
8.
8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And how long was her treatments?
Her treatment, the leukemia is a very treatable cancer, but it has one of the longest protocols. She was on chemotherapy for 2.5 years.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And now she's it's in remission.
It is. Yeah. She's cancer free.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How does she feel about that? Does she feel like is it cause her anxiety?
Yeah. Yeah. I wish that I could say like, oh, we're so grateful and she's so happy that her life is back to normal. But it's a traumatic experience, right? So now anytime she gets a nosebleed, she says, what if it's coming back? Right? Or anytime she feels tired, she's like, why am I always the one that's sick? That's sort of the thing that has come up now, right? Is it feels like some of these, and plus you add like, whew, teenage, like, I don't want to invalidate her experience. It's been very traumatic, but also like we now have some like teenage hormones happening, right?
Mhm.
So you have these huge emotions and these huge mood swings and these huge hormones. And when you mash up like just like teenage angst with like a very valid trauma, like we get big displays of emotion in our home. And yeah, it's very often like, why me? Like I'm always the one that's sick. I was blind. I am blind. I got cancer. And then she starts going down the micro list. I was sick last Christmas, right? Like I got the stomach flu. And she just feels, she's working through um what it means when you just get the short end of the stick sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I understand.
Yeah. And it's nothing anybody did wrong. That's what, and it's she didn't do anything wrong. I had to work through my own grief and fear as a parent. Like, did I do something wrong when I was pregnant? Right? Like, would I have done something different? And the answer is no. Nobody did anything wrong.
Yeah.
It just is. And so yeah, back to sort of how we keep her spirits up. We talk a lot about resiliency, and we talk a lot about training your brain to find joy in little things. Because in my experience, joy doesn't negate the pain. Like just I hate when people are like gratitude and anger can't coexist. Like that's not true. They absolutely coexist all the time. Um, but it makes it bearable, right? It doesn't take away the pain of her being blind, but it makes it survivable, right? And so when you experience big joy and great things in life and fun and silliness and laughter, and you can appreciate beauty and enjoy routines and feel comfort, those things don't mean that the pain goes away, but it's survivable. And so we have worked really hard on building a beautiful environment at home, and just being loving and having fun and having traditions as a family. And it doesn't take away the hard stuff, but it makes her life good. It makes it so it's not all hard stuff.
That's amazing, and I'm sure she's grateful for it.
I think she will be as an adult.
As a teenager, she's probably like, gonna be in my room.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's starting. They'll like lock herself in the room for hours, days at a time.
What, in terms of her vision or the cancer, which one does she seem to focus on more in terms of how it affects her?
Yeah, that's changed. It was cancer. When it was cancer, cancer was the biggest thing.
Yeah.
I was funny. I was talking to a friend. You I didn't realize how traumatic cancer was until like now after the fact. We're like back up to our elbows with all this vision stuff and trying to do remote schooling in a pandemic,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
transitioning to middle school. And vision loss is really hard. I forgot about it when she had cancer. Like that's how hard cancer was. Like cancer was bad enough that I basically like forgot she was blind. And it was just like her vision loss seemed like a non-issue for those 3 years. And Madeline's emotions reflected that. She was struggling with like immediate physical pain, um, and immunocompromise and fallout at school, and being basically poisoned by chemotherapy, and it
Mhm.
made vision a non-issue. Now I'm just starting to see that tide turn, right? Where if she ever gets sad, it's not about cancer anymore. It's about like the other day she said it was so sweet. She wasn't upset when she said it. She was like happy, just like musing. But it was hard for me as a parent to hear. She was like, "Yeah, I sometimes can't even imagine what my life would be like if I was sighted. Like I might have been really good at sport." And I was just like, "Oh."
Yeah.
So yeah, so she didn't grieve vision loss until really the last year, I think, is when it's gotten intense.
Yeah. I feel like she's gonna run through scenarios like that,
Mm,
and eventually, the scenarios won't run out, but she'll be more and more comfortable
right.
knowing that she can't play sports, and she'll find different activities that she can do
Mm-hmm.
that will replace that.
Yep.
I by no means am saying I'm even remotely close to being legally blind or anything like that. But like I had to give up driving,
Yeah.
like I don't have a driver's license
That's
anymore.
huge. Yeah.
So at first you're like really bummed out, but then
Mm,
as time goes on, it just becomes natural. It's just like
mhm.
the current state of affairs.
Right.
And then more things add to that list, not driving, like movie theaters, for example,
Yeah.
like they stress me out going to a movie. Like I like to get there early, and I have to sit in the back row, or else
Mm,
I'm gonna miss information on the screen.
yeah.
And it's just little things like that, and I'm very grateful that I have the amount of vision I do have. Like I don't get me wrong, I'm very very grateful for that, but it is.
The
I'm just trying.
gratitude and anger and grief can exist at the
Yeah,
exact same
yeah.
time. It's hard. Yeah.
I'm just trying to relate to what Madeline's going through,
Yeah.
and that even me, who has vision intact,
Yeah.
is having to deal with not doing certain things.
Yeah. It
So
is.
I can only imagine what it would be like to not have any vision.
Yeah.
So
And I think it's the other thing I've learned is just that like there's no suffering Olympics, right? There's no like hardship Olympics. Like hard is hard, even if somebody
yeah,
has it better, has it worse. Like, we know a lot of people who are visually impaired or have different special needs or disabilities. And like losing your vision later in life has its own hardships. But being born blind has its own hardships, and neither is harder, neither is easier, neither is better. They're just different breeds of hard, right? And and then you also have your different breeds of good in there,
Yeah.
and things to be grateful for, and things that are beautiful and in Holland.
Yeah, exactly. Your brain like rewires in a specific way.
Yeah, it really does.
And just like your brain had to rewire as a parent, Madeline's brain's having to rewire as a teenager.
Yep.
And it's a constant change. But luckily, I find that humans are very adaptable.
Oh, yeah.
And I think she's in good hands with you as a mom to adapt and kind of have the best opportunity. So I think that's cool how much you do for her. I'm sure it shaped you and her, like your bond, your mother-daughter bond. Like obviously you're going to be bonded with your daughter, but you throw in being blind and then getting leukemia and going through those things together. I'm sure your bond is like crazy tight.
It is. Yeah, it is. And she's remarkable. And I think that goes both ways, right? Like I remember, I can't believe I'm about to verbalize this because it might sound crazy to people. One of the things that one of the positive glimmers that happened inside of cancer was that it gave me the opportunity to be nurturing to Madeline again when I felt like I had lost that. So as you know, when she's a baby, you snuggle and you love them and you dote on them. And then I had two more kids and I got real busy. And then I was a single parent and went back to work. So I was a single working parent of three kids, and she was the oldest. And she became she's always been very like mature and precocious and brilliant and emotionally advanced, but she just became a little grown up, right? And I, because she was able to, I think one of the things I did wrong as a parent was that I expected her to, right? Like when my 6-year-old acted like a 12-year-old, I then expected my 6-year-old to act like a 12-year-old, and I forgot that she was just 6, right? And when she got sick, I was able to say, it gave me permission to put work on the back burner, right? Like everyone else at work understands that I have a different thing going on right now. It gave me permission to be like, I do not care about school. I will not be monitoring or completing homework. I do not care, right? I do not care about their well-rounded nutrition. They will be fed, but we will be eating takeout. Like it gave me permission to push all of the other busyness back and just like love on this little girl. And I hate that, I obviously would never say like, yeah, it was great that she got sick so we could do this. Like, no, if I could do it the other way, I would have. But one of the good things that happened was it gave me the opportunity that I needed to push everything else in my life back and just love on this little girl that has, quite a few special extra needs. And I think that it was a wake up call for me as a parent, so that even when she doesn't have cancer, I can push back everything else because this child has some real special needs. And she is brilliant and remarkable and a firecracker. And I wish everyone in the world could know her. And it, her getting sick was, I think, the wake up call for me as a parent to be like, it's okay to lean in more, right? When she's 6, she can be fully 6, and when she's 12, she can be fully 12 with all of the emotions that entails. And she's visually impaired, so she can be fully visually impaired, and she can require all the help that she needs, and that's okay. So that I wish I could tell you that was a thing that came naturally, but it wasn't because I grew up sighted. And so I am still learning how much help it's okay to give, and that there's no shame in that, and that it's okay to say like, no, we need an extra minute.
Yeah, I love hearing that, and I'm excited to talk to her.
Oh my gosh, yeah, she's remarkable.
Yeah, so for the listeners out there, again, I'm talking to Madeline as well, so you're gonna get to hear me ask her some questions. I'm excited about that.
Yeah,
I'm interested to see what she says.
I'm excited to hear. So my favorite thing is when Madeline talks to other people that have like any kind of disability or special need or visual impairment. So I expect she's going to fire away at you like, well, what does it look like? What can you
Yeah.
see? Like, what changed?
Yeah.
How do you feel? Like, she's gonna she loves to dig in because it's someone that gets it, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, she'll be pumped.
I try to get it. I try to get it. And that's the whole point of this podcast,
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I'm very excited to talk to her.
Yeah.
One more thing that I'm curious about that I'd like to talk to you about is like you also have two sons.
Yeah.
And so Madeline's your firstborn. What was it like raising your two sons who have?
Yeah. Um, so for Madeline, I never had to baby proof a house because she never like saw something across the room and went after it, right? Like her whole world was in her head. It was pretty self-contained. So even when she was mobile, she wasn't like motivated to like pull things off shelves or climb things because she couldn't see them. Um, I didn't understand baby proofing until I had a sighted child. I was like, oh my gosh, now I can't just put something on the top shelf and it's like out of sight, out of mind. Like they see everything. They've been watching me do everything. I can't just so I got away with a lot as a parent of a blind child that I couldn't get away with when I had the boys. Um,
And boys are just like,
yeah, they're
you know,
rambunctious. They're
yeah.
crazy. Uh, they are. The other thing though is it made me aware, right? Like I think if you've only ever known typically developing people who don't have disabilities, um, you forget you just assume that like, yeah, I'm gonna have a baby and this baby's gonna be typically developing. Like it's just
Yeah.
gonna be like a normal old regular old baby. Um, because my first experience through pregnancy was not that, um, because I found out that she was blind and it changed our worlds forever. When I got pregnant with Sam, I was hyper aware of all of the things that could happen to this child, right?
Yeah.
I no longer assumed that it wouldn't happen to me. So even now today when I tuck the boys into bed, I sometimes just listen to their little heartbeats and I'm like, "Man, all your parts work." Like your heart, like it just works all on its own. Like all your nerves grew. Like your liver's just like it's just chilling, like it's all fine. Like everything is working. And I am just awed. I'm awed at all the things that have to go exactly right for us to get what we call typically developing, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I'm very aware of of the privilege that is my health, right? Um, so as a parent, it made me aware, and then it's just made the boys incredibly empathetic. I'm so grateful that they have Madeline in their lives. Sam took his first steps with a cane because like he just saw his sister do it. He just thought that's how people walked, right? Like he
That's
didn't
funny.
know different. So his his big sister, his idol, is blind and has had cancer, and so it opens up the world to them, right? I think
Yeah.
they consider that they could be friends with someone that is different, with someone that has autism, with somebody that's in a wheelchair. Um, my dad is also in a wheelchair, and so I think they've just grown up around people with physical disabilities, and they are willing to befriend and care for people that are different than them. Um, and that again, like I wouldn't trade it. It's not worth it, but it is a really beautiful thing that has happened because of Madeline's diagnosis.
Yeah. I had on the note of feeling gratitude for good health.
Mm-hmm.
My sister gave birth to my nephew Easton, and he had a lot of issues with his lungs,
Mm.
and they didn't quite develop right due to a lack of amniotic fluid.
Oh wow.
And Easton was only with us for like 1 day.
Oh wow. Ugh.
Yeah, and it was a um, very hard hitting thing to happen to my family,
Yeah.
and experiencing that has opened my eyes
Mm.
to pregnancy and just that a human is being developed in the womb, and then also kind of puts things into perspective for me, like that I have a few problems, but at least I have problems,
Yeah.
and makes me feel it's another kind of way I try to remind myself to feel gratitude that I get to experience things, even if certain things are different. I'm still experiencing things, and I'm sure Madeline it feels the same exact way, so.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. It's so painful. Um, and it makes you very aware. Like I just have like a reverence for like, wow, everything just like all your parts work. That's a phrase that I think in my head all the time. And Madeline is very empathetic, even when, and it's sweet because even when, on paper, her life has been extraordinarily difficult. But when she encounters another person that has a disability that's different than hers, her little heart just breaks wide open
Yeah.
because she knows what that means. She knows that there's ripple effects, right? The disability is not just what you see, that affects the way you get ready in the morning and your social. Like she understands the waterfall that comes from a diagnosis, and so when she sees any kind of diagnosis in anybody or any kind of recent current events, any kind of injustice, or she's 12, so talking a lot about current events, she's becoming very aware of her privilege. And so when Madeline is starting to understand like socioeconomic dynamics and racial dynamics, her little heart is just like she's just starting to understand it, and she just like almost can't process it and I think part of that is because she has lived the reality of like those ripple effects, that one disability is never just one disability, it touches everything. In the same way that one injustice is never one injustice, it touches everything.
Yeah, everyone has something,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so has any of these experiences, I know you said you're taking a pause on writing, but has any of these experiences like inspired any potential material from you?
Yeah, I have a couple. We have, like I said, we've sort of had the master class on like how to re-architect your world when it blows up. I've re-architected a couple worlds now over the last 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that's I think it's because some of those things are like really deep and serious and poignant and like changing your worldview, and other ones are just like you should play more board games, like you should buy fancy soap because it brings you joy. It's very like Marie Kondo or sparking joy all over the place. Some of it's
Yeah.
funny and lighthearted, and some of it's really serious. But yeah, I think there's probably a whole wealth of material on resiliency and how to what to do when your world ends, life
Yeah.
after death kind of stuff.
And I'm sure whenever, you have the time to do that, I'm sure it's going to pour right out of you, I bet.
Yeah. I'm going to call it when the kids are all in high school or maybe college. We're going to call it it's in the 10-year plan.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And I know you had an Instagram account for Madeline when she
Oh,
was going
yeah.
through
I haven't updated it in ages, but I do.
her cancer. What was the handle on that?
Yeah, it's Madeline the Hope Giver, which we actually call her middle name is Hope. Her name is Madeline Hope. And we've called her that forever, long before she was diagnosed with cancer. But it was fitting for cancer too.
Cool. And I'll list that in the show description.
Yeah, cool.
So people can find it there too.
Yep.
And then what is your social media handle?
Mine's private, but people can request it. It's just Kate Elizabeth Connor. Elizabeth is with a Z, and Connor is with an ER at the end, not an OR.
And I'll put that in the show description too.
Cool.
Is there anything else you want to bring up while I have you on here?
I mean, I have like a million questions for you because I'm just interested. I can talk about vision loss and navigating New York City for hours, but
yeah, New York. I would say it's very friendly to the visually impaired, but also can be brutal too.
Yeah. Well, I can just imagine. I imagine that it's just sensory overload. Like it's a lot of sounds and a lot of smells and a lot
At
of
first,
inputs.
yeah. When I first moved here, it was 100% sensory overload, and every time I went anywhere, and I feel like to be honest with you, I'm someone who likes sensory overload because I feel like I have some sort of form of ADD where I just always have to be kind of engaged with something.
Yeah.
And I think moving here, there was always something I would, just some sort of stimulation going around me.
Yeah.
So I kind of, I definitely noticed it, but I kind of liked it. But now it's funny. I don't even, it doesn't even register anymore. You get kind of like numb to it, it's like,
it just become like white noise.
Yeah. It's like, you don't hear the air conditioner after a while,
Right. Yeah.
It's kind of like that.
And that's another thing that I think as a sighted person, it makes knowing and raising a visually impaired child makes me aware of my environments in a way that I wouldn't be. Like, I don't think I would notice if I were in a low light environment.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I walked into a restaurant, I'd be like, oh, I'm just in a restaurant.
Oh, restaurants are the worst.
Right. But like, I think when you know somebody and it brings it up into your awareness where you're like, oh, wow, like I didn't realize that I could just walk into a restaurant or a movie theater and not worry about being able to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of little things. And for the listeners, I plan to go into detail about those over time, when the theme of the episode is more appropriate to talk about things such as dating, like going on dates and like, do you just, when you meet someone, do you just outright say, hey, I have this thing going on, so if I don't see it, or do you try to play it cool and then tell them later, like it could backfire on you. They might be like, why didn't he see me, my like handshake, or why didn't he take that drink I handed him,
Yeah.
Little things
I'm
like
very excited for that dating episode.
Yeah. So the day it gets weird, and there's just a lot. Basically everything in your life is a little bit different.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And it doesn't mean it's worse, and it doesn't mean you can't do it. It's just different. And yeah, and noticing and learning and adapting to all those little shifts is crazy. Yep.
Well, Kate, I don't want to take up too much of your time. You're on vacation.
Yeah, I am. I'm at the beach. I'm excited.
Enjoy your vacation, and I'm looking forward to talk to Madeline. And as always, talking with you was a good time. I miss working with you.
I know. I miss working with you too. It was a special group of people.
Yeah. And I felt like everything you said just kind of like was easily digestible and like had just like positivity kind of mixed in with it. And
oh, I hope so. I sometimes feel like I'm a very negative Nancy about all the vision loss stuff, but it's just real. Like there's good stuff in there.
Yeah,
and it's hard.
Yeah, and that's why I brought you on, because I wanted to talk about the real stuff. Yeah, and that's the whole point of this podcast, is just real, raw, candid conversations about topics like we cover. So I think you crushed it, and thank you. And I find it inspiring, and I know my listeners will too.
Cool.
All right, Kate. I'll talk with you soon.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you, Lance. See ya.
Right. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
And there it is. I thoroughly enjoyed hosting that conversation, and I hope you enjoyed listening as well. And while I think our conversation provided a ton of solid information about parenting a child with a disability, I'm really just super stoked on how many good nuggets of just relatable, positive advice Kate was able to bring to the podcast. I also think Kate provided the perfect setup for me to talk with her daughter, Madeline. So don't forget, my episode featuring Madeline comes out next week. So make a mental note now to check back in later to hear more of their story. As always, thanks for listening, and you'll hear more soon.